Sit back and throw one back with your pinky in the air and a middle finger to the world, and join me, the eclectic gentleman Stephen Watts, as we look back on this day in pro wrestling history. But before we do, put that drink down, like, share, and subscribe, and without further ado, let's get our wrestling history on. Ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, it is October 27th, and we're going to start off as we always do on a positive note. That's right, these are your pro wrestling birthdays. 1962, the luchadora known as May Flowers. 1965, a very underappreciated manager of the 80s and early 90s, Harvey Whippleman. 1973, the leader of the Hurt Business, MVP. And we're going to keep that positivity train a-rolling. That's right, these are your pro wrestling history highlights for October 27th. Jumping in the Wayback Machine and starting in 1950, where we see Rito Romero win his third NWA Texas Heavyweight title by ending the second reign of Verne Gagne in Houston, Texas. Grooving to 1960, Mike DiBiase defeats Pancho Lopez to win the Amarillo version of the NWA North American Heavyweight title in Amarillo, Texas. That next year in 1961, Sputnik Monroe defeats Dory Dixon to win the NWA Texas Heavyweight title in Houston, Texas. 3 years later in 1964, Fred Blassie and Mr. Miyamoto defeat the Destroyer and Hard-Boiled Haggerty for the WWA Tag Team titles in Long Beach, California. Bumping ahead 1 year to 1965, Danny McShane defeats Dick Dunn for the NWA Gulf Coast Heavyweight title in Mobile, Alabama, ending Dunn's fourth reign. Moving to 1966, Tony Bourne and Mr. Fuji defeat Rene Goulet and Shag Thomas for the NWA Pacific Northwest Tag Team titles. And our final stop in the groovy 60s, 1967, the Hangman wins the NWA Central States Heavyweight title from Sonny Myers in St. Joseph, Missouri, ending Myers' 13th reign. Grabbing my bell-bottoms and disco ducking to the 70s, 1971. Ed Francis defeats Moondog Mayne to win the NWA Hawaii Heavyweight title in Honolulu, Hawaii. Staying in 1971, Sweet Daddy Siki defeats Sam Steamboat for the Hawaiian version of the NWA North American Heavyweight title. Making two stops in 1973, Dutch Savage and Jimmy Snuka defeat Bull Ramos and Ripper Collins for the NWA Pacific Northwest Tag Team titles. Our second stop in 1973 sees Robert Fuller and Bob Armstrong defeat Stan Vachon and Bobby Duncombe for the NWA Georgia Tag Team titles. Our final stop in the discoing 70s, 1978. Ole Anderson and Stan Hansen defeat Tommy Rich and Mr. Wrestling 2 for the NWA Georgia Tag Team titles in Atlanta, Georgia. Grabbing my boombox and going to the 80s, 1980. Larry Lantham and Bill Irwin defeat Tommy and Eddie Gilbert to win the AWA Southern Tag Team titles in Memphis, Tennessee. Fast forwarding 4 years to 1984, Chris Adams, Gino Hernandez, and Jake Roberts defeat Kerry Von Erich, Mike Von Erich, and Bobby Fulton for the Texas World Class version of the NWA World Six-Man Tag titles in Dallas, Texas. Staying in 1984, Bruiser Costa and Spider Webb defeat Ole Olsen and Randy Richard for the Vancouver version of the NWA Canadian Tag Team titles in Cloverdale, British Columbia, Canada. Bumping ahead 2 years to 1986, Big Bubba, aka Fred Ottman, defeats Tracy Smothers for the NWA Mid-American Heavyweight title in Memphis, Tennessee, ending Smothers' second reign. Our final stop in the 80s, 1987. Strikeforce, Tito Santana and Rick Martel defeat the Hart Foundation, Bret Hart and Jim Neidhart, for the WWF World Tag Team titles in Syracuse, New York. Martel forced Neidhart to submit to the Boston Crab. Ironically, the same move Stan Hansen used to beat Rick Martel for the AWA World title 2 years earlier. Grabbing my flannel and going to the decade of grunge, 1990. WCW held Halloween Havoc in Chicago, Illinois at the UIC Pavilion. with a main event of NWA World Heavyweight Champion Sting defeating Sid Vicious. During the match, Sting and Vicious fought to the back, and when they returned to the ring, Sting went for a slam and Sid fell on top for the pin. However, the real Sting ran from the locker room, a piece of rope around his waist, and pinned Sid with a Stinger splash. During the brawl in the back, the Four Horsemen had tied up Sting and sent Barry Windham, dressed as Sting, to the ring for Sid to pin. However, Sting got loose just in time to save the day. That next year in 1991, WCW once again held Halloween Havoc, this time in Chattanooga, Tennessee, at the UTC Arena, with a main event of WCW World Champion Lex Luger defeating Ron Simmons in a 2 out of 3 falls match. Moving ahead 1 year to 1992, Shawn Michaels defeats Davey Boy Smith for the WWF Intercontinental title in Terre Haute, Indiana. This would mark the first major singles title victory for the Heartbreak Kid. And last but not least, 1996, WCW is at it again with Halloween Havoc, this time held in Las Vegas, Nevada at the MGM Grand Garden Arena, with a main event of WCW World Champion Hulk Hogan defeating Randy Savage after Ted DiBiase and the Giant beat Savage up on the floor. After the match, Roddy Piper came out, his WCW debut, and confronted Hogan. The two had what many feel was a great promo exchange over who was responsible for wrestling's popularity, with Piper telling Hogan, "Do you really think they, the fans, would cheer for you if they didn't hate me?" Those were your short but sweet pro wrestling history highlights for October 27th. I'm the Eclectic Gentleman, Stephen Watts, and we'll see you tomorrow.